All right, good morning, and I'd like to welcome all of you here to Juniper Level Botanic Garden, Plant Delights. Welcome to our open house. Glad you made it out. Made it just in time. It's not too hot yet, so we are going to get out and take a quick little walk through some of the gardens. We're going to look at some of the plants that are in flower, and we're going to talk about pollinators. And we're going to talk about lots of pollinators, and I think some of the things will be surprising. And before we get started, I'm going to ask a couple quick questions. Can someone name for me some common pollinators or things that you know of are definitely pollinators?
Flies.
Bees. Name another pollinator. Flies. A lot of flies are pollinators. Hummingbirds. Those are pollinators. Some ants. Actually, there are a lot of things that are really weird pollinators. Butterflies. What about moths? Moths, absolutely, a lot of moths. What about beetles? Beetles, not only are many beetles pollinators, beetles are among the oldest of pollinators. In fact, beetles were pollinating plants before there were even flowering plants. Beetles are the most numerous group of animals on the planet. If you take all species of animals, 25% of every species of animal that's been described is a beetle. They outnumber all the other groups of insects. So, you learned a little bit of something. Beetles are actually pollinators. So a lot of times when you see things on flowers that look like a beetle, it probably is. But one of the things that's really interesting about pollinators is that oftentimes pollinators look alike, meaning that you can have bees, flies, and beetles. They're all going to be colored and patterned very similarly. And a lot of this is about taste, and a lot of it's about being able to sting, and a lot of it's about protection. A lot of it's also about blending in with the flower that they're on. So with that said, we're going to get started. We're going to walk this way. Look at some of the plants out here in the open. We're going to walk along the crevice garden, and I'm happy to continue on even after the program if you want to go look at a couple other places over in Pseudo. So we've got a lot to look at and a lot to talk about, and we're going to try to compress that into less than 30 minutes. It's hard to talk about 75% of the animal kingdom in 30 minutes or less. Thought we'd start from kind of the most distal point, so we're going to gather right down here. Now, when you're doing a garden, how many of you actually, when you're gardening, you want to try to do something that encourages pollinators? When you're looking to encourage pollinators, is there anything in particular, any group of pollinators that you want most, or are you looking to just kind of maximize the diversity? She said honeybees. Can anybody tell me something a little special about honeybees that most people don't know?
They're responsible for pollinating a lot of our food crops.
A lot of our food crops, that is the operative part. Our flower gardens generally do not constitute food crops, which interestingly, does anybody know where honeybees are native? Eurasian and North African, that's right, they're old world. So that means for millions of years here in the New World, pollination occurred without a single honeybee. So although honeybees are very important agriculturally, honeybees really are not environmentally or ecologically significant, other than the fact they displace a lot of our natives. So I'm not an anti-honeybee person. In fact, I appreciate honeybees, but I think that we also, when we think about pollinators, many of our native species and many of our native bees are under much greater stress, and their numbers are much more greatly diminished because of habitat loss and of course loss of a lot of our native plants, versus honeybees, which we as humans maintain them as we do other domesticated animals, so they really are not as imperiled. And honeybees also, there's entire facets of veterinary medicine that are allocated to honeybee research and honeybee health. So we're going to kind of focus more on bees that aren't the honeybee. So with that said, flowers that are native, near native, or even flowers that are great nectar sources. There are many people that are very much purists, they only want natives, but at this point in time, if a plant serves as a food source for native insects, then I say use it. Things like buddleia. There are plants that come from Central and South America. Bear in mind, insects in the Americas are related to one another from Argentina, Chile, all the way to Canada. So many of these plants are also related. So they're also, in many respects, they can, for our gardens and for the purpose of pollinating insects, be interchangeable. I like to point out some of the things like the salvias, things that are in the mint family. These are great plants. There are a lot of different genera, a lot of different species. And as you can see right here with this single salvia, look how many different insects we have. At first glance, you're going to see a lot of bees, several species of bumblebees. In fact, I see at least 2 species of bumblebees. We have carpenter bees. We do. There's a honeybee. We do maintain some honeybee hives on site. They are in upper field, away from the public. We prefer to keep it that way because we don't really want honeybees agitated. But you will see honeybees, and that is, we have, like I said, as I mentioned, we've got a number of hives here on site. Skipper. These are sometimes kind of considered similar to butterflies. They actually do fit within that whole butterfly group. Can you see the red admiral in the back, the butterfly? Yeah. That's related to the painted lady. It's one of the brushfoot butterflies. The caterpillars feed on nettles. When we're looking at pollinators and pollinator gardens, it's also important to kind of integrate plants that may not necessarily be as aesthetic, because one of the things in which we need to do to encourage and maximize pollinators is also maximize life cycles. And so for many of the plants, sometimes it's good to intermix within your flower beds or within your gardens plants that don't really seem immediately to serve a function outside of letting the butterfly, the moth, or whatever lay its egg on it, let the caterpillars eat it, and that way you can ensure that you got the adults. So that's a really integral part of a true pollinator garden. Isn't just having flowers to feed the adults, but facilitating all stages of the life cycles. Sorry, I had a gnat flying around my face. Non-pollinator bug. Now this plant is kind of ending its cycle of blooming, but it's got some pretty cool insects on it. There's a really nice wasp back here. Do you see the kind of cobalt blue wasp? Many wasps like that are solitary. Solitary wasp, that means they don't live in hives or nests. They're single moms. And not only are they pollinators, not only do the adults, let's step aside and let the cars through. Not only do the adults pollinate, but the adults also, when we see some insects like this in our garden, you know what else they're doing? Many of them are predatory and are looking for other bugs. It could be aphids, it could be spiders, it could be caterpillars, it could be grubs, because in turn, that's what they're feeding their young. And like I said, many of these wasps that we see are not your nest builders. They're not hive builders. They're solitary. And I like to use the word single moms. They got babies at home that they got to feed, so they're out collecting nectar to fuel their own energy needs with sugar. But then they're scouring your flower beds looking for things that may or may not be, and I don't like to use the word pest insects because everything exists in balance. Every species is serving a function, but they help to maintain that balance. So that particular wasp is a solitary wasp. It's fecid, and they are very much so parasitoids or predators on a lot of other insects.
What do their nests look like? Do they have
Some of them do. Some of them may nest in the ground, just a single wasp with a hole. Not like yellow jackets. You're talking about a single wasp because in a hole. Things like dirt daubers, you know, they build a little dirt, little mud. They stuff it with caterpillars, crickets, or spiders. Potter wasps, which that's another family of wasps, but they make what looks like the little urn that sometimes you'll see on a screen or on a porch. Looks like a little amphora or a little urn with a lip. And they'll stuff it full of things for their young. And all of a sudden we get a flurry of cars.
The bumbles are chill and wasps are horrid. So
No, that's not entirely true.
I mean, for me, like, I don't mind gardening with the bumbles around, but I get away when I see wasps.
Well,
They
the vast
kinda
majority.
like to chew on me.
Well, the vast majority of wasps won't. Guess which insect really can be kind of a little bit territorial about flowers? Honeybees.
Honeybees?
Yes, they can. Yeah, they can be a little bit, yeah, they find a resource base, they don't like to share it. Like I mentioned, plants in the mint family, so when you are looking at plants to buy, look for things that are salvias, agastaceae. There are a number of things like monarda, bee balm, things that are in the mint family. Those are oftentimes very attractant to things like bees and wasps, to a lot of the hymenoptera, the things that most people associate with pollinators, as well as some of the butterflies. Here we have another plant in the mint family. A lot of bees, quite a few honeybees, a few bumblebees. Got the white cabbage white butterflies. Does anybody know where the cabbage white butterfly came from? And it is a butterfly. The larvae feed on cabbage. Does anybody know where cabbage came from? Europe. Butterfly came from Europe. So it's a very common European butterfly that's now naturalized here in the States. And it will feed on wild weedy plants that are in the same family. Guys, if we could step forward, yeah, let the cars by. And again, more plants in the mint family. You really can't go wrong with things in the mint family. Yeah, that's actually some bees on hostas. A lot of plants with tubular flowers are very attractive to a lot of insects, including bees, butterflies, and moths, hummingbirds. All right, we're going to take a quick look at some plants right here. Now this is a blazing star. It's in the aster Acae, the kind of daisies, asters, black-eyed Susan, sunflower family. A lot of plants, a lot of flowers in this family are very attractive to a lot of insects. And
It looks like a Liatris on steroids.
it is. It's a really, well, I don't know if it's on steroids, but it is a Liatris.
Okay.
It definitely is, yes, it is.
It's huge.
It is huge. And what you'll notice is oftentimes there's a recurring theme in the colors of flowers that attract. Does anybody know why a lot of these tend towards purples and pinks? Ultraviolet, that's right. Insects see ultraviolet. And when we look at flowers and we look at the colors of flowers and the shapes of flowers and the things like that that we appreciate in our gardens, that was an interesting wasp, just flew by my face. It's all about appealing to an insect to accomplish what for the plant? What does the plant need done? Pollination. And when the plant is pollinated, then it produces seeds, which is the next generation for the plant. So flowers have developed to attract the pollinators so that the plant can in turn reproduce successfully and have healthy seeds, making healthy babies. You see here, there's some pretty cool little wasps right there. These are scaleid wasp. You know, people talking about like being afraid of wasps. These are solitary again. Solitary wasps have too much to lose to be a confrontational or aggressive. Do you know what that means? Like I said, they are what? A single mom. She does not have the energy or the resources to risk if something happens to her. Who's going to go home and take care of the babies? Now, wasps that build big nests have workers, and workers are essentially soldiers, and they're an army. Their sole purpose is to defend the nest, the babies, and the reproductive female. But when you're dealing with solitary wasps like this, a lot of times people are afraid when they're walking through their flower garden because they see some wasp on the flowers. You saw that. Not only did she fly away, she flew away, not towards me at all. And generally speaking, that's going to be the case. Really, with most of these insects, when people are stung, it's because they either brush against it, get it in their clothes, or inadvertently grab it when they go to grab a plant or a flower. You're cutting flowers, you grab the flower. I remember my sister sticking her nose in an azalea as a kid and getting stung on the face by a bumblebee. So, you know, they're more or less incidental versus being aggressive or defensive. But things in the aster family, great pollinating, or great flowers, nice plants for pollinator gardens. And you can see quite a few different species. That's one of our native bumblebees. That's yet a different species of bumblebee. This one is actually a reproductive female. Do you see the wasp on the top with the long, slender body? Just flew over there. That's one of your solitary wasps. Those are predatory on things like caterpillars and crickets. I think that one in particular is crickets. This is an interesting plant that most people would never think of as a pollinator attractant. Does anybody know what this plant right here is? Do you know what this plant is? This is English ivy. Now, when most of us see English ivy, we think of a vine, right? When English ivy reaches the top of a tree or the top of a house or a high point on a fence, it changes its morphology and its growth form to become more shrub-like. The leaf morphology changes, the branching changes, and it begins to flower. The interesting thing is that plants in this family have rather, I don't like to call them simple or bland flowers. They just don't really stand out to you and me, do they? But look at them. They stand out to bugs. And there's no doubt that it's a combination of chemical attractant as well as probably whatever the insects see. And the vast majority of the insects that are on this are going to be bees and wasps. Occasional flies, but I want people to come over here and take a look. See if you can get in kind of close. And I see at least a dozen species on here. The really big wasp in the back is a cicada killer. Has anybody ever heard of that? What does a cicada killer do? Other than getting mistaken for being a murder hornet. Because it's big. They're single moms that paralyze cicadas, take them down a hole, feed the cicada to their baby. So, and let me see, let me see if I can kind of get her to come forward. There she is. Come here. Think I can get you to, no, there it is. And a lot of times cicada killers will fly right up to people and they'll look at them, they'll scan you, and it really scares and freaks. The only way it's going to sting you is if you do this. That is the only way you're going to get stung. You've got to do this. And I don't know what it is about their curiosity. It terrifies people. They're just really kind of a curious wasp. Even if you get near the hole, they'll fly at you and scan you. It's almost like they are not aggressive. They will not attack you. They will just frighten you by getting kind of into your personal space. But we also have some beetles over here. Let me see if I can grab a beetle. Saw one a while ago. And you're welcome to come on in and get closer over here to the, oh, here we go. Here's a really nice beetle. It's a really pretty one. Is that a beetle?
Oh, that's cool. Oh, well.
It's got really long legs. This beetle is in the scarab beetle family. You want to take a look at it? Take a look at a beetle.
Sweet.
And this is a pollinator. And like I said, a lot of these things kind of superficially, you notice the color on it? What were the primary colors? Kind of yellowishy, black, orange. So superficially, when it's flying around, crawling the flowers, it looks like something that if you grabbed it might sting you. So there seems to be, this is a fly, not even a bee. But like I said, we've got probably easily a dozen species or more flying around this one plant. And I'm going to, I don't know. Oh, yeah, another nice insect. You're welcome. Welcome to come over and try to smell the flowers, see if you can get any. Just remember, if you stick your nose near the flower, make sure there's not a bee on the flower. You can shoo the bee off. But this is English ivy, and it's the reproductive flowering portion of it that can be made from cuttings and then create its own plant. So once it's that reproductive stage, you can actually have a shrub. So it's not going to really make the vines that are going to be invasive and crawl all over everything. And it's a great plant for pollinators, especially a lot of our native pollinators. They love the nectar, and again, it's about nectar sources and getting food to the native insects.
I've never seen plants crawling so profusely with
Isn't that amazing?
ever.
Isn't that amazing, though? It's an amazing plant.
It's like it's its own, like the plant is moving because there's so many insects.
There are so many insects on it, and it's really, really good. And this is an example of a plant that is good for the honeybees because it's a Eurasian plant. It's good for native bees because the nectaries are easily accessible, so the insects can get that nectar, that sugary, sweet, energy-rich liquid food. And I'm going to step back and allow everybody, if they want, to just take a quick little walk by the, step in there and take a look.
So you can get a shrub growing cultivar off that just by taking a cutting from the top?
When you take cuttings off things like that, though, you want to make sure that it's either before or after flowering. You don't want the active flowering stage. That makes it oftentimes rooting cuttings more difficult. And this form can be purchased. I'm not sure, I don't know that we sell them. I've never seen that, but there are sources for getting English ivy flowering stage, flowering forms. But yeah, it absolutely is crawling with plants. I mean, crawling with insects. Does anyone have any questions or any points or anything they'd like to add or? Any questions? No? Does everybody feel like they learned a little something?
Absolutely.
We want healthy pollinators, we need a diverse garden. And we need to maximize what we put in our garden to facilitate a lot of different species of pollinators. Because not only are these insects actively pollinating, they also have other ecological functions, whether it's part of being in the food chain or part of self-regulation. Some insects feed on other insects. And most of us like birds. And what do baby birds, most of them need? They need bugs. So really, it's about kind of making that garden holistic. So a healthy garden, healthy flower garden has lots of bugs, lots of things flying around the flowers.